Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a program that looks at some rather interesting and, if not far out, topics. And I think we've got a topic today and a guest that fits both of those categories. So, Dave, you and I have participated in a group called the Para chat, Para chat group. And this is just essentially a bunch of people like us who are interested in paranormal topics. And we talk about everything from, cryptids to, a lot of UFOs, some ghosts kind of stuff. And one of the members of that group is a person I've come to know a little bit. His name is Eric. And I asked Eric if he would like to be on our show, and he said he would be more than willing to. So that's our guest today, and I think we will really enjoy him and what he has to say. So, Eric, are you there with us?
I am. Hello. Good to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So, do you have anything you want to start with, Dave, with Eric? 'Cause sometimes I start with the questions, but I know you've got a
Well,
question. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I'm glad to be here too, and glad to have Eric. And the only thing I wanted to say is that Eric has participated in the email group, like you said, in the Parachat. He's a very articulate writer, very detailed, and just a smart guy, from what I can tell. And I'm guessing a very reliable witness. So, though what he'll talk about here is, like you said, a little bit out there, a little unusual. I believe what he's going to tell our audience. He's very credible in my eyes, and I just appreciate his thoroughness with the details and his descriptions of everything, and his analysis of different things on our Parachat group emails. So that's the one thing I'd like to say is I'm just looking forward to hearing his detailed analysis of what happened. And it's difficult when you're the witness to such an amazing and odd circumstance. So I trust that he'll be able to explain it in a way that conveys his emotion as well as something that would be scientific and detailed for an observer to kind of take in from an outsider perspective also. And I want him to elaborate on the emotional aspect that he experienced too, because we can't edit that out.
So a good starting point may be, and Eric can share what he wants to share here. Tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and how that might have affected or led to some of the experiences you've had.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, David. I'll try my best to partially live up to them. As far as my background, I had a pretty average middle class upbringing. I had some paranormal experiences, but nothing major. It was pretty much just a background thing once in a while. My mother had paranormal experiences as well, so I had an open mind growing up, but I didn't have an excessive amount of experiences. I could probably count all of them on one hand as far as my youth. And so I wasn't religious, and I definitely didn't believe in what I'm about to tell you about here today, which is a winged being sighting that I had in 2013. So all I can say is that I was very skeptical. I wasn't religious, and I never would have believed the following account had I not seen it with my own eyes.
Eric, could you give us a sense of some of those early paranormal things that happened that maybe didn't rise to the occasion of this interaction with this wing being? But you said there were some things that happened to you when you were younger that kind of fit into that paranormal category. What were some of those things?
Yes, I think the earliest memory I can remember is that my mother and I would always hear a baby crying in an upstairs bedroom of our house, but there was no baby there. So it
Hmm.
was just like a ghost noise that we would hear with regularity, and we couldn't really explain it. So nothing too out there. When I was in my teens, I played around with the Ouija board.
Hmm.
And when I accused the person I was with of faking it, right when I said the word fake, there was just a huge boom that shook the house. I thought our house got hit by a dump truck. It was so loud. I ran upstairs, and there was a bunch of glasses that had been in the cupboard laid on the floor in the shape of an arrow. And I was freaked out. Her and I left to her house immediately. So just kind of like little events like that. When I was living by myself in my early 20s, I used to hear a female voice singing from my bedroom. And it wasn't an English voice. It was a very sad song, maybe a Native American language. And I would hear it. I'd walk into the bedroom and it would be gone. I'd go outside to see if there was a radio on. There wouldn't be any explanation for the noises. I'd go sit down and it would start again. And it was just periodically, but on a somewhat regular basis. I would also see like sometimes just ghosts, like shadowy figures, things like that. But I was pretty at ease with it. It was normal to me. And I pretty much just lived with it and didn't take too big of an interest in the subject, aside from a general curiosity.
Hmm. So what was your explanation for these strange things? Did you, some people when they have paranormal types of things, they question their sanity. Um, Sometimes they just kind of dismiss that and say, "Well, I didn't really experience that." So how did you handle some of these early experiences?
Well, I was sure that I was dealing with ghosts, but at a young age, I wasn't really too aware of the depth of what all of that really meant. I just, ghost was a general term. I didn't think too much about it. I also saw lights in the sky sometimes, and I just assumed that they were UFOs. My mom had a close encounter with a bunch of family members when she was young, so I grew up pretty accepting of the idea that it was UFOs and ghosts. And that was pretty much just my general opinion. I didn't think that I wasn't doubting myself because there was generally multiple witnesses. And I don't have a history of any delusions or fantasy type thinking. So I was pretty sure about what I saw. And it really did fascinate me. It was one of those things I didn't talk about a lot, but once in a while someone would bring up a story and then I'd be excited to say what I experienced too. But it was pretty much just to that, rare passing conversations, and yeah, just normal life took over usually. So it wasn't a main focus for me, but I always knew there was other things out there. We'll just say that.
Yeah, I think some would argue that not you, but people are not paying attention if they think that all there is to life is what happens during a typical day. I think reality is a lot more complex than that. So let's talk about um, this major kind of incident where you had contact with, should we call it a winged humanoid or?
That's a
Uh,
good term.
Okay, so tell us about that incident, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
All right. I apologize too if my anxiety gets to me while I'm telling this story. It's difficult for me to talk about because it was very unnerving. I'm really not trying to instill fear in anybody, but at the same time, I can't deny it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. I was driving to Ottawa. I live just out of town, about an hour's drive south of Ottawa, Ontario. And on my drive, it was a normal day. It was September 17th, just after noon, when I was approaching the city limits of Ottawa. And in the distance, in the horizon above the road, I saw something in the sky that was just a dark object just in the air above the road. And it caught my eye, but I kind of just didn't think too much of it. As I drove closer, I started to see wings moving on this object, but it was still at a great distance. And at that time, I said, oh, it's probably a seagull. So I dismissed it and put my eyes back on driving on the road again. And as I got closer, something wasn't right. I noticed that this object was much bigger and farther away than I had perceived. So I was starting to question if I was actually seeing a bird or not. And I was driving at 120 kilometers an hour, probably maybe 70 miles an hour, towards this flying humanoid. And it was flying above the road towards me. So we were approaching each other at a high rate of speed. And as it got closer, I noticed it had a dark silhouette. And the next thing I could see is that its arms were outstretched ahead of it while it was flying. It had giant white feathered wings, like massively oversized wings, and it was using the wings to fly. Its wings were going from tip to tip, top to bottom, in a really slow, graceful stroke. It probably took about 10 seconds for the wings to go from top to bottom. And then I saw that it had a very long, dark gray serpent tail. This tail was about twice as long as legs should have been for the proportion of its body. Its whole body was dark, dark, dark gray, almost black. So I had a very clear sight of this being. It was a sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. As it got closer where I could start to make out more detail, it turned its head and looked directly at me. And that's when I went into complete shock. This is where my brain was suspended because I couldn't believe what I was looking at. So it started to stare at me, and it was very unnerving. At this time, it was almost about to pass over my car. And I noticed in the corner of my eye that the car next to me was about to collide with my car. It was a 2-lane highway. And both that driver and myself had, I guess, been distracted by this sight and almost collided in the middle of the road. We looked at each other, corrected our steering, and the look we gave each other, I was pretty sure that he saw it too. It was a look like, do you see that? And we both looked back up to where it was. At this time, it was just circling overhead, doing a 180-degree turn. So my view of this being went from it approaching me from the forward direction to actually flying alongside the path of my vehicle to my right side. And it was still staring directly at me and coming to a lower and lower altitude. At this time, it stopped flying and it just had its wings out gliding. So it wasn't flapping its wings anymore. And it was just staring at me, and I was pretty hypnotic staring at this being. I couldn't really make sense of what happened or what was happening. But I started to check the rest of his body for details to gather information on what I was seeing. And at that point, I noticed that the serpent tail that I had previously seen had turned into a pair of legs in outstretched position, horizontal position. So that was unnerving to me as well, that I was looking at this thing and 1 minute it had a serpent tail and the next minute it had a pair of legs. So this was just really unnerving. Even telling the story, I just feel so much anxiety. But as it was flying just above treetop level alongside the highway with me, there was a clearing, and it started to move its body into a vertical position, and it started to flail its wings out a little bit to slow down. And as it passed over a lower row of trees, I could tell this being was going to land. It ended up landing right next to me in a field beside the highway. It planted its legs. It didn't take a step forward when it landed. It just stood there and stared at me with its wings outstretched. And I didn't know what to do. I really wasn't thinking clearly. I just kept driving. And the picture that you'll see on the screen is the last view I had of it as I drove away while it was staring at me. So that was the initial encounter with this winged humanoid. And that pretty much was the day my life changed forever.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Understandable.
something like that would cause your life to change. So you're pretty sure that there were other people on the road that saw, at least the car that was next to you, that saw the same being.
I do believe that he saw it as well, yes.
And what was their reaction? Did they stop, or did they just keep driving, or what do
Well,
you know?
I lost track of that car. I've always wondered what happened to that driver. I just wanted to find him because I think he's another witness, and that would really add credibility to my story. I think he slowed down after that point because for the rest of the sighting, there was no car beside me, and the cars behind me seemed to have seemed at a greater distance, like they had slowed down as well. So I don't know if that's because we almost hit each other and other cars got scared. Maybe he didn't see what I saw. I was just looking up to the sky to ask, like, what are you looking at? Because he could obviously see that I was looking at something. So I would love to find him. He was a Middle Eastern gentleman. He was driving a late 90s Buick Century, I believe was the make of his car. And yeah, I looked hoping that he would make a report, and never found any other report of the incident from anybody. So that's still an open book there, but I would love to find him. I'm pretty positive that he saw it as well, but it's a hard thing to talk about. So it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't report it. I've been talking about it for 8 years and word still isn't out. So it's not surprising that even if he was talking about it to a small group of people, that I wouldn't hear about it either. So if that witness is out there, I'd sure love to hear from him.
So you have a very detailed drawing. First of all, is that your artistry?
Yes, I drew that not long after the sighting just to capture what I saw.
Okay, because you're obviously a very accomplished artist too. Do you draw these types of figures or any particular style?
No, that's the only time I've ever drawn anything like that in my life. I had no previous interest in the subject. I ridiculed the idea of winged humanoids, and it's kind of funny because now I get treated that way for having seen one sometimes, but I
Well,
can deal
just, I
with
mean,
it.
the way that you've drawn the musculature, and I mean, it's very anatomically correct looking.
Yes, you
And
can see in the photo, he was actually wearing a tunic. It was a short tunic with short sleeves and a V-neck, but I could barely make it out. It was thin as silk, and
hmm,
you could see every muscle through it. Like he was this. I guess there would be humans on steroids that had that physique, but very
yeah.
few humans would be as bulky as him. His shoulders and pecs was like a barrel. Like this thing was a few feet thick. It was
But
very big. That's another thing, a detail I didn't mention. When he
Mhm.
landed, and this is going to sound incredible, this being was no shorter than 10 feet tall, maybe 15 feet tall. He was massive.
And so do you draw other things though, or is this just a one-time?
I used to draw when I was a kid,
Okay.
like kid stuff. When I was in my teens, I did graffiti for several years, but that was the extent of my art
Well, the
experience.
artwork is just what hits me because it's not, I mean, the next 1,000 people you encounter, if you say, here, draw a very muscular, 10-foot tall creature that looks realistic, and probably none of them could do it. I know I certainly couldn't, and I doodled around and whatever since I was a kid, but it's just the drawing is so
When
accurate
I
too.
felt compelled to draw that on the day that I drew it. I just something told me to do it. I could only find a pencil and 3 crayons from my kids' coloring set. So that's literally just what was
I
lying
know.
around.
That's what's incredible. And I think that's a key piece of information here because, well, there are two things that I'm thinking of. I'm sure that Dan is thinking of. And that's that you described your history with some of these, what you might term paranormal issues or incidents. And you kind of blew it off as, oh yeah, I had a few things happen, but you've had more things happen than everybody else I know combined, short of some of the paranormal groups that when we talk to witnesses. But so it's clear to me at least that you've had a history or a string or a family tendency to have some sort of a window into this paranormal realm. And so that's the first thing that strikes me. The second is that uh, the thing you just said, which is you are compelled to do this, and that seems to be a key part of a lot of these encounters, is that the witness is just compelled to get it down on paper or otherwise memorialize it or record it somehow. But
Yes.
not just that you want to write it down, but that you portray it in a way that's very convincing and very dramatic too. It clearly was not something you just jotted down a note and said, hey, remember, September, what day did you say it was? See, you knew the exact date,
The
right?
17th, yeah.
Yeah, just saw a winged being today, but and had for lunch, I had pizza for lunch. I mean, it was clearly a very significant moment, and like you said, it changed your life forever, and of course, how could it not? But
Mhm.
that's what strikes me too, is that just the detail of this image and the way it conveys to me the power and the drama of that particular experience. And it's so very accurate anatomically too. I can't get over that. In the head and the face, it's just very realistic looking also. So the fact that you didn't have it as a talent prior to that necessarily is kind of extraordinary to me also, and tells me there's something else going on here, something at work that a message was communicated to you, or you were supposed to talk about this eventually, although it's difficult.
Eric, how long after the sighting did you draw that picture?
Um, it probably took me about 2 months or so
Okay.
afterwards to feel compelled to draw it while it was still fresh in memory. because I would close my eyes and I had a clear picture, but as time went on, you lose details in that. So I felt like I should record what I saw at that point while it was still fresh.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I was definitely compelled to draw it, just to show people what I saw. And I was compelled to do other things as well. There's another part of the sighting that day that I haven't shared yet. But after that, I basically became obsessed with researching. Like I went from being interested in cars, money, and girls to spending my Saturday nights reading ancient texts. Like it was a
Right.
complete transformation. And I was compelled to understand what I saw, like with a compassion I've never felt with anything else in my entire life. I did nothing but study winged serpents and different traditions of winged humanoids and recent sightings and all kinds of occult magic sources, all the places that speak of these beings. That's all I did for about 7 years. It's only been this year that I've been able to just step away and try and find a balance between everything. So yeah, it's been quite a ride, but I do feel that I was moved to research and understand my experience in kind of an unnatural way. I kind of felt like something was guiding me to do it, but I could never put my finger on it. When I was researching, I would have tons of paranormal experiences, seeing shadow beings, orbs all the time. After my winged humanoid encounter, actually just prior to the winged humanoid encounter, my encounters with orbs just started happening with a regular basis, and multiple witnesses, everything inside the house, outside the house. So I think that was the beginning of the activity flurry that led to the actual winged humanoid encounter. And after the winged humanoid encounter, I had more orb experiences than ever. If I would study orbs like for hours, which I would tend to do, I'd go outside and there would be an orb just sitting there. Like, so it was pretty interesting. I felt we had some kind of a connection between whatever these anomalies are, and it was some kind of a psychic or deeper connection of some kind. So they seemed to be observing me researching that, or me spending time researching seemed to attract them. I'm not too sure, but
So one of the questions I was just thinking about is, and this would be in regard to the day that you saw this winged creature flying above your car and then landing. Did you feel like there was any kind of communication that was going on between you and this being? And I'm thinking either telepathic communication or the creature actually said something to you.
not at that time. It was just shock. I had no understanding. My brain literally, it was like a computer that was crashing. I couldn't think of anything. I was trying to draw a rational explanation. Like my brain was just saying with confidence, like, oh, it must be, and I couldn't think of anything. Oh, it must be that. Like I was trying to explain it, and after not finding an answer, I just drew a blank and went into panic mode and tried to get out of there. But there was a message. I think I was supposed to stop. When he landed beside me, I think I was supposed to stop, but I didn't. I was way too afraid. But here's where he left his message. It was when I got home from the sighting. I walked into my house. I remember being nauseous and green. I was in so much shock and so disarrayed from what I had just seen. I couldn't wrap my head around it yet. I went to the bathroom. I looked at myself and I was like green. Literally, I looked just so pale and nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
So all I wanted to do was just go sit in my bedroom and think about what I had just seen. I had to pick my kid up from the school bus like a half an hour after I got home. So I was just trying to get myself together. And when I got to my bedroom door, which I had closed before I left, when I got home, there was this toy bus, a double-decker 1960s type Matchbox toy of a double-decker bus leaning against my bedroom door. And no one had been in my house since I had left. So I was in so much shock from seeing the winged being that I probably normally would have just walked by this object and went to sit down. But for some reason, I picked it up and I thought it was strange, but I was too overwhelmed by what had just happened. So I set it on my television and went and sat down and kind of forgot about it till later that night. And I asked everyone in the house, like my son, his mother, if they had seen this toy before, and no one had ever seen it. So it was very strange, but I put it back on my TV and went to bed. And the next day I actually had to work. So that was quite the day. I was in complete shock. I barely remember it. But when I got home from work the day after the wing being sighting, I turned on the news to see if that other witness or anyone else had reported what I saw. And what was on the news when the TV turned on was that a double-decker bus had been hit by a train, and the accident had occurred right where I had seen the wing being on the day before. So it was very strange. I didn't put it all together at first, but in time I came to see that maybe since I didn't stop to listen to what he wanted to say, that he left that bus as his message. It sounds very strange, but whatever, I don't know where it came from, this bus, but there's actually a dent in it where the actual double-decker bus got hit where I saw the wing being the day before. So I don't know what to make of that. I kind of took it as an omen to change our course, but it's hard to say.
So I'm guessing, and maybe you referred to this, maybe I missed it. Did you tell anybody about seeing this being?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, who did you tell and what was their reaction? You don't need to give us a name, but just who did you tell and what was their reaction?
The first person I told was my girlfriend at the time, just because I couldn't contain myself. I wasn't going to say anything, but I didn't know what to do. I'm like, okay, people are just going to be able to tell something's going on, so I might as well just tell. And I told her, and inadvertently my son heard too. He was playing and snuck up and listened to the whole conversation, so my son knows about it as well. I told my parents. A while later, I told my brother. I told a friend or two, and I got a bad reaction from one of them. They thought I was crazy. So I stopped telling people for quite a while, and don't tell a lot of other people, except for Alita and some of her acquaintances in the various paranormal groups that you're speaking of. But usually, I've just kept it to people that are very close to me. And on one instance, I'll give you an example of one of the orb encounters that's happened since the wing being sighting. I had told my brother about the wing being and my frequent observations of these spheres of light. And he kind of doubted it because both of us were we were pretty rational people. He's more rational than I am. So one night we were in the backyard and I just kept pleading with him. I'm like, oh, I just wish you could see one so that you knew I wasn't crazy. If you see one, you would understand. And we had this conversation for a few minutes where I was just wished that he could see one so he would know that I wasn't losing my mind. And he's like, I trust you, brother. You know, I don't doubt you. I'm like, yeah, but if you saw one, you'd know. And then we were both looking in the sky while we were having this conversation, and one of these orbs, a bright yellow light, just manifested out of thin air, came right above us and disappeared over our heads. So I found that the orb was kind of confirming what I was telling my brother, which was, I was thankful anyways. I don't know exactly what happened there, but an orb appeared as I was desperately hoping that my brother could see one so that he could believe my story, and it did appear. So pretty interesting interactions with whatever those are.
And you mentioned Alita's name. I just want to clarify who that is because Alita has actually been a guest on our program. Not only is she part of that Parachat, but Alita DeBee is state section director for MUFON here in Washington State, where Dave and I are at. And Alita is also a member of something called the Experiences Resources Team, where people like Eric can hook up with these individuals and have somebody that they can talk to that's not going to call them, you know, crazy or whatever. So just to identify who Alita is. You know, when I first heard this story about the bus and the kind of dent in the bus, and then the connection with an actual disaster involving a bus, which I think you just relayed to us. The first thing I thought of is the Mothman episode in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where sighting of a winged humanoid creature, which description-wise maybe isn't as uh, as close to what you saw, but was followed by some kind of tragic event. So, are you familiar with the Mothman narrative, Eric?
Yes, I ended up studying the Mothman several years after my encounter. And yeah, a lot of people do relate the appearance of the Mothman as a harbinger or an omen of disaster. According to John Keel, a lot of people had premonitions of the bridge and warnings that a disaster was coming. If we look at those types of entities throughout history, they've often been associated with portents and omens of misfortune. I think I just learned the other day that the word monster actually comes from the Latin monstrum, which actually means evil omen. So the etymology of the word monster actually derives from the fact that they were associated with evil omens. So I was not sure if the winged being that I witnessed caused the accident or knew that it was going to happen. I was always unclear about that. I never knew if the being had good intentions or bad intentions. Kind of like the Mothman, like it obviously doesn't seem like a very nice being. But I had kind of mixed feelings about my experience. I could never tell what the intention of this being was or how exactly it was related to anything. I have my first-hand observations, and then I pretty much have to speculate like everybody else. So.
Well, that's an interesting connection to the Mothman. Obviously, the creature you saw didn't look anything like the descriptions I've heard of the Mothman or Bill Grabowski, who did our show on the Mothman. I don't see any connection in
Well,
terms of
the flying
yeah,
man aspect.
yeah, that, yeah. What I
That's
was
enough
driving
right
at
there
is
to me.
it didn't have big red eyes. This creature
Well,
had big red eyes and was kind of black. And I'm
it
talking about,
wasn't as humanoid, right?
yeah, yeah,
As this
that's,
one.
but,
This,
but,
yeah.
but I think an interesting point that Eric is making is to this day, and I think if you talk to Bill Grabowski about this, he would be unsure as to whether or not the creature that he described in Point Pleasant caused the collapse of the Silver Bridge or just showed up as, like we were talking a minute ago, as the our harbinger of that disaster. So I'm seeing some connections
Yeah.
here, although there's differences too.
So the bus, though, I'm interested. First of all, did anybody die in the actual bus accident?
Yes, there was six fatalities, 9 seriously injured, and another 20-something with minor injuries. It sheared the front of the bus right off.
So that is a major accident that would be full of all sorts of tragedy and negative emotions and aftermath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like one thing about the Mothman sightings is they were often related to high strangeness and just very weird occurrences. Here's one related to the bus, and the omen is that when I saw the winged being in the sky, I eventually turned off the song I was listening to because I just wanted to focus on what I was looking at. But the chorus of the song that was playing when I saw the winged humanoid was on the right track, but on the wrong train. And I always wondered if that had something to do with it. Like your brain tends to wonder when you're looking to find out what goes on with these things, but there was a lot of coincidences that day in particular, and in relation to the bus and the train and other things as well. My license plate, I even, not to sound like somebody who looks too deep, I can't say if this is related or coincidence, but my license plate has the name of a deity that resembles in ancient times, the description of what I saw. And the numbers on my plate are the date that I saw it, 179, the 17th of September. So I almost wonder if it was an event that was meant to happen, or if I'm just looking too far into things. I never know.
Well, you never know. And there's always a question of whether you can look too far into things, because maybe things are so connected at such a fundamental level that there's no such thing as randomness or coincidence. I mean, synchronicity is how the universe operates. Potentially, it's just that we can't see the connections underneath the behind the veil, so to speak. So even though this experience is very bizarre on so many levels, you can come up with explanations, I think, and that's that you have a history of being able to tap into some of these realms. Maybe it was your doing in terms of bringing this being into existence, at least temporarily, because of the impending emotion connected with this disaster. Maybe it was, again, a harbinger that only you could see. Maybe it was strong enough that multiple people could see it. I mean, there are different things you can postulate that make sense when you accept there is an other realm or other realms.
Mhm.
But it does make you wonder why a massive winged being. I mean, what kind of symbolism does that hold? So in your studies after this incident, did you come to any conclusion as to why it would have manifested in this particular shape or form?
No, I do not know. I don't know his motives or anything, so I don't know if he was trying to scare me or what the deal was. If you look at the winged serpent in some traditions, it's connected to the demonic. Like you have the demons of Hindu mythology, the Naga. You have a lot of occult, like Solomonic, jinn and demon type entities are seen as winged serpents, and even bat winged humanoids. In other cultures, like dragons were revered as wisdom keepers, guardians, protectors. We have the same thing in the Americas. The winged serpent sometimes represented the creator deity. It sometimes represented ancestral spirits. It could represent many different things to many different cultures. So the fact that there is actually so many traditions relating to that form makes it hard to discern which one is correct. So I've always had a problem with discernment because there's so many different perspectives on these beings over time through so many cultures. One of the basic symbolic representations one could look at is that the serpent is tied to the underworld, usually, and that wings represent the heavenly realm. So I guess in that respect, it would represent both the upper and lower worlds, but it's difficult to say. He also appears in other forms. That's one thing about this being. I looked into the shape-shifting aspect because he did change from serpent-tailed to bipedal. And I don't think it's a flesh and blood species as you or I. Like some species, octopuses, chameleons, can change their appearance through natural ways. But this being often appeared to me as an orb of light. So that really got me thinking that it was probably an energy-based species, and that they can manifest probably in a variety of forms at will. So he took that form for that day, but I guess it left the impression that he wanted. I might not be able to explain that, but yeah, and it's amazing because the winged serpent's one of the oldest symbols in human record. It's been with us for so long. I never would have believed that they were real. Most people take them as allegories or different kinds of representations or as religious belief. But yeah, it's for me just to look eye to one really opened all those doors and a lot of questions for me, that's for sure.
No kidding. Yeah, that's a very dramatic symbol or form to have to take in for a human brain to, try to make sense of it.
So have you seen this being again?
I have only seen it in physical form the one occasion, September 17th, 2013. And I thought that was going to be my only encounter with it. About a year and a half passed and nothing else happened. So I was at that point just thinking, okay, that was a once in a million lifetimes event and I'm good now. But I was so disturbed by what I saw that this being, I think through an act of compassion, and this is where I get the conflicting, it acted like a monster, but it also had a different side to it. I think it saw how distraught it made me and how disruptive it was to my life. And it came to me in a dream. And I wasn't a person that believed in dreams or anything like that. I was very skeptical. I thought that people who claim such things could just easily make it up, and I didn't put a lot of faith into it. But when I had this dream, it was not like a normal dream. It was very vivid and more real than anything else I've ever experienced. And in the dream, this being essentially conveyed that he loved us like we love our own children. And there was just a very strong sense of love. So I think he was trying to put my fears somewhat to rest by showing that to me, that he cared about us. It's like, not to worry. It was like, it was the same way we felt about our own children. So that was interesting. And then another question at the time, because I had no knowledge of any of the things I know now, I really did think that I had seen an ancient alien. The extent of my knowledge came from cable TV, the alien programs and that. And I had thought at the time that I had seen an ancient Anunnaki and that it was an extraterrestrial. I was very adverse to religious beliefs. I really didn't want that to be true. So I kind of, at first, perceived it in the way that it was best for me as an alien. And then over time, through my experiences and other things this being showed me, and a couple more dreams, he showed me that he actually dwelt in like an abyss. I got the sense that it was like an inner earth type of environment. And that was him telling me that no, he wasn't from another planet. He was indigenous to Earth. And then there was a few other dream communications, but essentially he really wanted to convey to me most that he loved us like we love our own children, and that he was from some kind of an inner earth or abyss type of place. I believe that he's interdimensional, and that's why they're not really commonly seen. They can exist outside of our visual light spectrum in much more powerful energy ranges in the electromagnetic spectrum. I'm not a scientist and I'm not qualified to speak about such things, but from the evidence that I've examined, I think that they're living outside of our visual light spectrum, and that they're able to transfer their frequency to ranges that can manifest them on the physical plane. Or as another incident with this being, one of the last interactions I had with him, he actually spoke to me in my living room one evening, and I couldn't see him. There was just a voice coming from a definite spot in the room. So they can be invisible, they can appear as balls of light, and they can also take physical form. So it's pretty hard to track them down as far as pinning down what they really are. But I think interdimensional best explains their capability to do all of those things.
Does this being have a name?
I did name him. He never told me his name. I think he was giving me clues to who he was, but he kind of wanted me to search it out for myself. He never told me directly who he was, but because of his dark gray skin, I called him the Gray One. I wasn't sure if he was good or bad, so to say, black or white. So Gray One seemed like an appropriate name, and it kind of stuck. So.
Wow, fascinating.
And so do you feel a connection between this entity and the balls of light? Do you feel personality in those balls of light, the orbs?
Definitely.
Do they feel
alive.
like spirit guides? Do they feel like just observers or ET? I mean, what's the nature the vibe that you get from them?
They're definitely living energies. One instance where I was putting a coffee down on a desk in the morning. I was just barely awake, like 5:30 in the morning. And I put my coffee on the desk, and I had the sense to look up to the top right corner of the room I was in. And when I looked up, there was a basketball-sized ball of whitish yellow light. And when I noticed it, do you know when you're on like a bus or something and someone's staring at you and you look at them and then they look away really fast to pretend they weren't looking at you?
Yeah.
Okay, when I looked at it, it had the same reaction time and took off through the wall. So once it noticed that I could see it, it was like, oh, and it scootled out of the way, like I wasn't supposed to be seen kind of thing. So
like, oops, wrong frequency.
Yeah, so reactions like that showed me that they do have character, and they also take time to think. Like they have, like humans take a second to think about something. It had a reaction time in that interaction. So that was pretty interesting. And I do feel that I have a connection with this being. Like some kind of bond was made where, yeah, I feel that there's some kind of a link between us. Definitely.
Well, and people who who may have just stumbled upon our program or stumbled upon some of these paranormal topics, they may be thinking about this as, oh my God, this is just across the spectrum, out there crazy stuff. But Dan, I'm sure you'll agree, we've talked to dozens of people who express the same types of things that Eric is talking about now, but they may be in different forms, UFO, or like Barry Taft talking about the orbs that he photographed and are in his book. And it's all just a matter of energy and what form it takes. And the question, of course, is, where does it originate? Where does it reside? Can it come in and out of our experience, our realm? But eventually you get to the point where it's like nothing surprises me anymore. So it's a giant winged man. That's just how that energy chose to come to our our attention at that point. Or floating oranges, floating orbs that look like oranges. You talk about some of the crop circle incidents, and that the report of orbs there, and we have lots of video of these orbs too. But that's the same sort of form that you're talking about here. I believe it's a form of intelligence that shows up this way in our realm. So you can make a lot of connections between your seemingly bizarre episode here. But I think what's key is understanding the relationship between the witness's emotional state and your belief system, and trying to figure out if it is something that Eric manifested, or is it just something that Eric has a talent for seeing, or is it some other dynamic going on here. And that's the thing that fascinates me the most, is that why does not everybody see winged beings at some point in their life? Most of us see nothing ever, and then we die. But some people seem to have a very they seem to be prone and a talent even to seeing these things. And I'm sure a lot of people would say, I wish I didn't have that talent. We've had guests like that who said, oh boy, I wish I wasn't psychic since I was a 3-year-old, because it can be overwhelming to your senses, especially when nobody else around you knows what you're talking about. So do you get the feeling, Eric, that you have different abilities or senses that the people around you don't? And also, is that something that runs in your family? Because it seems like you said your mother has some of these tendencies or these capabilities too.
Yes, my mother had some stories that she told me about poltergeist activity and the UFO encounter when she was young with a bunch of family members when they were staying up at the farm. And I've heard that it is generational. UFO and paranormal is said to run in the blood. I don't know how much credit to put in that, but my mother and I both had these type of experiences. So yeah, I think that some people are just more perceptive. At the same time, I might have just been in the right place at the right time. I don't know. I don't think that I'm anything special. It seems normal to me when I look back at things that happened. But then when I start talking about them, that's more when I realize that, yes, I have had more interactions with paranormal activity than most people. So I guess, yeah, I must just be tuned in a little bit in a certain way. But it's not all the time. It's most of my life, 90% of the time is completely normal. And then there's these periods where activity seems to spike.
Yeah, and that's what's really frustrating, interesting and frustrating about this whole thing, is that even the people who are sensitive, you can't control it. I mean, the vast majority of them can't invoke things. They can't make these things happen at will, on demand. If you could do that at 100%, or if many, many people could do that at 100%, then we wouldn't have all these mysteries, because we could see it consistently enough to form a hypothesis around it or whatever. So the frustrating part to me is just, like you said, is it random, or is it I was in the right place at the right time? We just still don't know after all the what's that?
Or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending how you look at it.
That's what I was thinking. Wrong place, wrong time. So one question that kind of comes up is, Dave here has always asked these thought-provoking questions. What are you supposed to do with this, Eric? Do you have a feeling that this being, the gray one, wants you to do something with what has been revealed to you and the resources that you've looked at? And so, yeah, what do you do with this besides
I'm
talk
at
to people?
I'm
Like,
at I'm sorry. I'm at kind of a loss for what to do, to be honest. For a long time, I was kind of deceiving myself into thinking that I could find the answers to everything and explain everything. And then I reached a point where there were certain knowns and certain things that couldn't be known. So yeah, as far as that goes, I don't know. Um, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do. There was one experience with an orb where I think I made an agreement to do something, but even in the agreement that I remember, I don't remember what it was that I was supposed to do. I had a close encounter with an orb. It left electromagnetic interference to my vehicle for 2 days until I had a mechanic come and disconnect my entire electric harness of my vehicle. I have some video of that actually. Even without the keys in, the speedometer and the tachometer were almost breaking at some points. There was just energy stuck in my car. And it was just an orb of light that came to me on my driveway while I was sitting in my car one night. And when it approached, I at first had missing time. I didn't remember anything except for watching it leave. And I was pretty sure I had like an abduction missing time experience. But when after I watched it leave, I just walked in the house calmly, like everything was okay, and went to bed. I was surprisingly calm about it. But years later, I started having memories that would come back to me, and I couldn't explain at first where they were coming from. I was like, this isn't something I'm imagining. I keep remembering something, and it was strange. And over a few weeks, it came back to me that I actually had a conversation with this orb during that encounter. My memory came back to me years later that I was actually encased in the orb. I was surrounded by the same color light that I saw approaching me. And within this orb was a being, a humanoid figure made of light, the same color as the orb. And I remember parts of our conversation where he said, "Are you sure you want to do this? It's not going to be easy. It's going to be really difficult. Are you positive you want to do it?" And I remember responding, "Yes, it's the right thing to do. I want to do it anyways." And he was like, "You're not going to enjoy this. Are you sure you want to do this?" And yeah, there's other parts of the conversation, but essentially I just kind of half-wittingly, without even really knowing what we were talking about, agreed to do it because it was the right thing. And whatever that might be, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just speaking about what I saw. But I did agree to do something, but I never really knew what it was.
Hmm.
yeah, very extraordinary kinds of things. I'm trying to think of where else. Oh, I know what I want to say. Um, your um, your reaction to just a second here. I've got some kind of a noise going off, Dave. You might have to edit this out. I've got an alarm going off, which I shouldn't.
Oh, that's all right. Happens in every interview, doesn't it? Somebody's cell phone beeps or rings or something.
Yeah,
But
Never
mine's.
fails.
but
Let me see if I go ahead.
it's I have, several questions, but I'll just limit it to this one, and then I wanted to talk about something a little bit different if we have a little time left. But it's amazing. You hear about all these sort of encounters and these sort of messages from beyond and from these entities, and yet, as Eric demonstrated in the last anecdote, it never seems to be a message that is perfectly clear. It'd be nice if one of these guys would just sit us down on the couch and say, "Hey, okay, here's the deal. What I need you to do is ABC, or the reason I'm here is this and that," and explain it. But we never get an explanation. We never get a clear mission, it seems like. And there's always this veil of haziness and half consciousness, and frustrating, sheet thrown over our heads in these cases. And I'm just wondering, Eric, if you have a feeling for why that protection mechanism might be in place, if that's what it is, or is it just that our human minds are just incapable of really comprehending what we're encountering, and that's what leads to this sort of fuzziness around these events?
Those are very good questions. Yeah, unfortunately, these events don't come with instruction booklets. I wish they did. That was one of my biggest hurdles, is why me? What do I do about this? Do I tell people? Do I keep it to myself? Like, just, I've been wrestling with those kind of things for a long time. One theory might be that they use these events to inspire us, and it would be too easy if they just told us. Maybe it's the journey. Maybe
Right.
it's cultivating something in the person when they start to look into these things. That might be one reason, because that's definitely what it did to me. It turned me into somebody that just had their interest peaked in understanding these things, whereas before I never would have considered even thinking about it for a minute. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, yeah.
as far as the communications, it did communicate with me. I mean, there was the object it left in my house. Um, there was a couple of dreams, and then one time it spoke to me. And what I noticed about his communications were that they're very simple. It didn't want to sit down and be friends and have coffee. It's very direct energy. And I think that it talking to me would be kind of like equatable to trying to explain how an engine works to an ant. Do you know what I mean? Like, we couldn't get into anything,
Right.
we couldn't convey any information because an ant simply couldn't understand what we were talking about. So I think the limit of that discrepancy between intelligence, this being's definitely of superior intelligence by I don't know how much, but very wise, understanding beings. So I think they have to speak to us kind of symbolically, because I think that's about the best we can understand personally. But not to undermine humanity's potential, but I think there's something to the fact that they're just on another level. And I mean, if we look at ancient texts as well, like some of the accounts of Solomon when he was dealing with Asmodeus always spoke in symbols as well. So it might just be something that they do. I'm not too sure.
Well, that does make sense. My wife is a dog trainer, or she's a veterinarian, but she, has done her fair share of training dogs, and we've had a couple of very, very smart dogs. They're border collies. The first one in particular really wanted to learn, and he knew something like 30 or 40 hand signals and single word or maybe 2 or 3 word commands that he could, he got down pat and he could understand it. And maybe the relationship, sadly, is, I mean, not sadly, maybe it's just the natural order of things, but maybe we are the dogs in this scenario. We can only handle so many commands and symbols and directions. And I don't know, maybe that makes sense, but that also brings up a very concerning point, and that is that I think a lot of the resistance to accepting these sorts of incidents and these ideas, the barrier is that people, scientists in particular, but people in general, don't want to admit that they're a few rungs down the ladder of evolution, the cosmic ladder. Do you think that's probably why we seem to not make very much progress in understanding these things?
Well, I think doubt is the main hurdle. I mean, when I was researching, I had a very clear advantage because I had seen what I was looking for, so I knew it was real. Whereas if you haven't had an event like this, you're not going to be so focused on understanding one thing, and you're going to be distracted by other things, and you're going to have less of a bearing on what really is connected to that thing. So my experience gave me an advantage in researching. But I find that people's preconceptions are what define their beliefs. What they want to accept is the evidence they're going to put in their brain to support their opinion of an event like this. Like, I never would have believed it. I would have made up every reason to say that a person like me with a story like this was crazy before I saw a being like that. So yeah, I think there is a lot of not wanting to accept these beings because it's just easier not to. And I think a lot of people as well don't want to look into the religious aspect of it, because you can't deny that these beings are predominantly featured in the world's religions. So a lot of people are atheistic, scientific, materialistic people, and they can very easily turn a blind eye to this type of thing if it involves things beyond their accepted parameters, right? So,
Right.
and as far as ego goes, like I used to think I was the coolest, top dog, smartest person. I was really full of myself, like completely materialistic, until I looked in the eye of this being, and I felt like a bug. Like it humbled me.
Yeah.
I mean, humans will always have ego, but it humbled me severely. I realized at that point humans were not the be all end all in the universe. We're small potatoes.
Yeah, it's quite a transformation from girls and fast cars to, studying ancient religions and understanding biblical texts and, Central American lore and things like that. But, when you get into it, it's quite interesting because it goes and goes and there's no end to the learning. Maybe that's what some of these incidents are designed to do, is just to prompt us to go down that rabbit hole and go as far as we can.
Well, I think by and large that's absolutely correct. The experience I was talking about with the clairaudience, where this being spoke to me, his words were actually pretty telling. He's, like I said, I was researching and I felt compelled to do it. And it was strange because I had no previous training. I had no idea what I was doing. And when I would go to the keyboard, I would just type things in that gave me the answers. Like I felt it was a little bit unnatural, how I was able to find the answers I was looking for in the ways that I did. And it was very thorough study of just endless topics and obscure things that had minor relations. But so after all of that, I didn't know if I had been influenced to research or if it was just me in my natural response. But when he spoke to me, it was March 6th, 2018. And he said these words: "I have shown you all you need to know." So then I definitely got the feeling that yes, he was guiding me to teach me about him. And like I said, I think it was out of compassion after seeing him because it shook me up so badly. I think he wanted to kind of set me at ease because I had so much fear and I had no knowledge. So the fear was just engulfing me. But as I started to learn, I realized that was the best therapy for the shock that I was in, because I was able to fill that void of fear with some basis of rationalization to come to terms with my event. So it took time, but I think it was part of healing after the trauma of such a strong encounter. And I think that he did help me come to terms with what he was and everything, just so that I think he felt kind of bad, actually. I don't know how to describe it, but.
Yeah. Well, he's just a big softy in the end.
I wouldn't say that either. I think there's definite reason to fear such a being.
So there's two comments I'd like to make, and then I think we've probably monopolized Eric's time enough. One thing would be the trauma that Eric, you suggested, how you felt after this event happened, and you felt nauseous, and you took a look at yourself in the mirror when you got home, and you didn't like what you see. And one of the things that strikes a chord with me on, whether it be contact with ghosts or winged beings or even Bigfoot, that these events can be traumatic. And there needs to be some kind of a resource out there for people to deal with this. I remember talking to a gentleman who had a encounter with Bigfoot, and this guy was a clinical psychologist. It's been quite a while ago, who witnessed his family kind of in close proximity to a Bigfoot. And when I was talking to him at a Sasquatch conference, he broke down and started to cry. And this was like, I don't know, years after this had happened. So the trauma of being exposed to things that you're not equipped to deal with or expecting to deal with, that's an important thing. And I think I would put in a plug. MUFON has a resource that Eric has taken advantage of, the experiences resources team, where there's a venue for people to come and talk about this stuff and not be ridiculed and and receive some kind of support. So that would be the first comment I would make. The second comment I would make that's relevant to our discussion today, there's a book that's out there by the name of The Believer. I think the book is entitled The Believer, and it's a book about John Mack. And of course, John Mack, as some of us know, was a Harvard trained psychiatrist who began to explore, for lack of a better term, the alien abduction phenomena, although I think his exploration was much broader than that. But one of the things that I remember Mac saying, and unfortunately he's no longer with us, but um, that when someone asked him, okay, so he interviewed, I don't know how many people who claimed to have been victims of abduction. And the question he was asked, well, are these people crazy? And of course, I asked Eric, I mean, who did you tell about this event? And why did you tell him or why didn't you tell him? And one of the things Max said that I thought was very enlightening was that he said, in all these people, and he interviewed a lot of people, hundreds of people who were clinically, or maybe not clinically is not the right word, but were identified as abductees. And what he said is, he said, I don't think these people are crazy. I just think that what you're hearing from them is the result of an extraordinary event that they happened. And as I listen to Eric talk, I'm reminded of what John Mack said.
Yeah, for sure. It's a type of post-traumatic stress, PTSD. It's the same as going onto the battlefield and, or seeing children shot in front of you in the middle of a war or something. It's just extreme emotional distress of a different sort, not necessarily violence provoked, but as Dan said, when you encounter something that's just so hard to process, the reaction of the body is to shut down in a lot of ways, get depressed and scared of everything and anxious. And I think we really should be treating these incidents as stressful, real, or at least in the mind it's real, but a lot of times you do have evidence too. And Eric presented some good evidence too, the bus left behind, and he's a very credible witness. So we have to look at these incidents as not all just in the mind. And there aren't resources either, because who are you going to go to? I mean, yeah, you could go to psychiatrists, but is the psychiatrist going to be the one thinking, woo, this guy's out of the realm here too? So it's tough. Who do you talk to?
Well, and that's why I mentioned the MUFON's Experiencers Resources Team. And I'm
Yeah.
sure Eric is familiar with, and we did a show with her, Gwen Farrell, because Gwen Farrell's a therapist. And, if you tell her some weird story, she's not going to look at you like, well, you're just a nutcase. She's going to listen and relate to you as someone who's deserving of respect, and probably in her mind, and I don't want to attribute thoughts to her, but just kind of knowing how that operates, she and other people like her in that experiential resources team is going to be accepting of what you're saying and not ridicule you for saying it. So I think that's really, really important. But Eric, I'd like to thank you for being on here with us. I know this is not your typical venue, podcast that's going to be out there for other people to listen to. But I really appreciate you coming on with us today, sharing your story. And I don't know what Dave would say about this, but I think our role, uh, besides just talking to interesting people, is to educate folks about what's happening out there, what's really happening, not what happened at Costco today, but what's happening in people's actual lives, and how traumatic that could be, but how very insightful that could be. And I think if there's a purpose to what we do, and I think you've helped us fulfill that purpose, is that's kind of what this show is all about, educational. It's very educational and hopefully giving people an avenue to talk about things that should be talked about. So
Well, it
Dave,
also,
Dave,
yeah, I
Dave,
was gonna say along the lines, of the therapy part, I'm hoping that we're not licensed therapists or anything, but I'm hoping that just the fact to have a receptive audience is a type of therapy. If we had more widespread understanding and a forum where people can talk about things without fear of ridicule, especially, that go a long way towards moving us further in understanding, but also helping people like Eric deal with the stressors. So there aren't, MUFON provides, resources, but it's pretty hard to find other avenues too. So I think just talking about it can help. Hopefully it helped Eric today to have us listen and support him. And I think our audience will do the same too, because he's a very credible witness.
No, thank you very much.
I'll be interesting to see what kind of comments get left on the YouTube page for this
Yeah.
show. It'll be interesting. So what were you gonna say, Eric? Didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, not at all. My apologies. As far as comments, yeah, if your audience has any additional questions that they'd like to ask, I can keep an eye on the comments, and I don't mind answering any additional questions that are out there. You guys hit on probably one of the most important impacts of an event like this, which is the trauma and the effects it has on a person. I didn't understand how affected I was when I was going through it. It was like a cloud over me. It wasn't until years later when I actually took a mental assessment online. I did that to prove that I was sane. So if people heard my crazy story just as a joke, I could show them, hey, I'm not crazy. But when I took the mental assessment, it showed that I had a score of 68 out of 100 for extreme anxiety disorder, for witnessing a traumatic event, and that I had a score of 77, I believe, out of 100 for PTSD. And this was 6 years after the event, when I was already feeling a lot better. So that was when I realized how much it had actually affected me. And I have to say that one thing when you have an event like this and who do you tell and everything, it really does something to your personality. I was trying to live up to my old self, but at the same time, I was consumed by what had happened and thought of it. So my old self became like a shell around what was really going on. And it was something I didn't feel that I could share with people. So it really affected my personality. I became completely disattached. I went from somebody who spoke to 200 people a month to 2 or 3 people a year. I really just spoke to my closest circle, really disengaged from everything. I was having tremendous trouble dealing with it because you just can't talk to anybody. And then I reached out to Alita DeBee at the Experiencer research team with MUFON. And I can't say kind enough words about how helpful it was. I don't know if I would have made it through the experience. I was having doubts of whether or not I could continue living life with such a discrepancy to my understanding and what I could say publicly. So talking about it with her and with you guys does help a lot. It's amazing. Talking about these things really does help more than most people could realize. So I would recommend for anyone who's experienced something traumatic that they're having trouble with to reach out to the ERT, because they are fantastic. She probably saved my life, to be honest. That's how much it affected me when I saw this thing. After years, I just was having so much trouble dealing with it. If I hadn't found somebody to listen to me and to help me to come to terms with it, I might not be here today. She started to tell me, you're not the only person that's reported these things and stuff like that. And it really helped to calm me down and get me through just having someone to talk to. And we're still friends to this day, like 5 or 6 years later. So really good experience with them. And yeah, they can definitely turn things around as much as is possible after something like that.
We're fans of Alita as well. The only negative thing I would say is that's the Experiencers Resources team as a resource that's open to people who've had UFO contacts. So what do you do if you've had a ghost contact, or what if you do like the guy I was telling you about who saw Sasquatch? There needs to be a paranormal resources team out there where people who've had all kinds of anomalous experiences can get help with that. That's the only downside I can think of. But Eric, once again, I want to thank you very much for being on the program. We'll probably see you on a Parachat session that's coming up here, and just thanks a lot for doing the show with us.
Well, thank you very much for your time, guys. I really enjoyed it, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my experience with you and your audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I look forward to more of your research and analysis and your reports on the Parachat email list. Also, they're always chock full of information, and you can tell that you've devoted a lot of your time, if not your life at this point, to doing that research and understanding how things work and the history, and it's clear that you were affected profoundly by this winged being, whatever the reason for that form. I mean, it appears to have made the impact that it intended. So for better or worse, I think that's who you are right now. But we appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much. The feeling's mutual. Can't thank you enough.
Okay.
Dave, if you'll hang on for a minute, I want to talk to you about an upcoming show here too. So Eric, take care. We'll see you again.
All the best. Thanks again.
Okay, bye.